This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good morning and welcome to the Monday morning break with me, Marie. I'm delighted to be back after Christmas break, and I'll be talking to Josh this morning about embedding research into your practice.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So good morning to everyone, and as I said, I'm really delighted to be back after a Christmas break. I think it's been quite a few weeks since I've done a show, so really looking forward to it this morning. And I'd just like to start by saying good morning to Josh and welcome.
Morning.
Morning.
How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Really good. I was saying this morning, I wasn't sure whether to say Happy New Year to everyone because I'm not sure at what point we stopped saying that. And I think probably the 8th of January, I probably won't. I will just stop there. But yeah, really, I've really been looking forward to this. Research and research, embedding research and CPD and all of those things are things that I'm really passionate about. Probably do quite a lot of it in my own time, just sort of out of interest. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into it and talking about that with you.
Yeah,
brilliant.
absolutely.
So I thought what we could start with is I put a few things out kind of to people, to networks. I put it on X, that sort of thing. I was just sort of looking for people's views on embedding research and on things, I guess, what people understand as trauma-informed approach, for example, and things like that. So I thought a good place to start might be to kind of hear from you what you think about those things. I know I've got sort of my thoughts on it, and then perhaps we kind of go through some of the things that people have said and let's take that as a starting point.
Yeah, fantastic.
Brilliant. Okay, so as we said, kind of on the promo, your part of your job in your organisation is you are the research lead.
Yeah.
So do you want to can you tell us sort of what that is and what that entails?
Yeah, okay. So essentially, to me, being a research lead is about sort of looking at the available evidence, like research evidence online, and in books as well, and sort of taking quite a critical approach of reading those sources and then thinking about how the research tells us how we can improve what's going on in the institution or the educational setting.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because my one of the things that when I was thinking about this and what I think about sort of research and embedding is I feel like we all, particularly in education, maybe in other roles related to young people or people, we've all got our whys, we've all got our reasons for being here, we've got our values. We talk a lot about organisational culture and things like that, but my feeling is that the research and the wider understanding of theories and studies is the evidence. I think that's how I feel about it. And I think one of my big things as well is that sometimes things don't get embedded.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about things, or you might read about things, but I think research embedded practice is when you're actually able to use that to transform your practice.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there can be a mismatch, can't there? Just between like what goes on in the setting.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think it's something that I think people are much more aware of it, but it's kind of that you're not just doing CPD for the sake of it. You know, you're able to actually learn something new or try something out, and then actually use it.
Yeah.
Which is really good. Yeah. Okay, so in your role, you're sort of reading around a lot and sort of analysing the things that are out there and things like that. Yeah, brilliant. I mean, it's so interesting. Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah, it's a good job.
Yeah. Well, I thought then the other thing that I was going to, I sort of asked people is the word sort of trauma informed are used a lot. And I think you sometimes see quite a lot of, well, I know I see quite a lot of discussion about it, sort of trauma-informed approach. And then there are, I guess, people talking about sort of being very clear about behaviour expectations and all of that kind of thing. And I think research-embedded, trauma-informed, all those kind of things, to me, fall into a bit of a danger of being used as buzzwords.
Yeah.
Without thinking about what they mean. So yeah, I kind of, as I said, put it out there, and said, ahead of my show, I'd like to hear your views. What does research embedded mean, and trauma informed? So some of the I should go through some really, really interesting answers. So I had an answer saying, I've done some reading on the trauma-informed approach. How I understand it is mental health diagnosis resulting from trauma instead of a sort of pathological genetic basis. And trauma has a spectrum, and then behaviour is then shown as a result of the person trying to keep themselves safe. So to be trauma-informed, or to have a trauma-informed approach, I think this person is saying that it's understanding that when people behave in a certain way, it's because that's what they've learned to do as a response. We had some other views about this is a good one. So about research embedded is about using a particular approach, such as trauma-informed, to support the implementation of your aims and goals. It can provide justification and a reasoning for how you do it and why you do it. Which I think, that's something that I definitely agree with.
Absolutely.
And then we had some comments about everyone can experience trauma, and everyone's experience is different. Being aware, accepting, listening, validating, and not trying to fix is the trauma-informed approach through various methods. So some really interesting thoughts around what it means to be trauma-informed and research and so on. How was it when you were thinking about it ahead of the show?
So trauma-informed, or okay.
Yeah, let's go with trauma-informed.
Yeah, so I think there was some really interesting thoughts there. And I agree. It's definitely those things, particularly behaviour being a product of the pre-existing feeling, unsafe and that sort of thing. I guess different people have different reactions to past trauma, and so it's not gonna it's gonna present in very different ways as well. So I would agree with a lot of those things which you said there.
I think it's interesting. I think like I said, if you, I guess, looking into it a bit more about what it actually means, I think is really important, isn't it? And that comes under, I guess, embedding the research.
And there's a huge sort of neurobiology lens on the trauma-informed approach as well.
Amazing. Are we able to get onto that in this show? That would be great. Because I think that's probably a very big one. I was saying it's something something that I'm really interested in. And I know, even from when we very first met, we were talking about the body keeps the score. So I think, I do recommend that. Well, I know you recommended it to me, and I now recommend it to anyone. So anyone who's interested in trauma and kind of understanding, it's so wide reaching, isn't it? It's when you start to think about the impact that these things can have on so many things and behaviours and so on, let alone then into education. I guess. Okay. Well, I kind of had put together some of my thoughts as well, because I thought from asking everyone else what they think about it. So I was reading, and it was saying that trauma has to be one of the most misunderstood forms of human suffering, and underlies many mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and addiction. And recent studies, I mean, this might be something that linked to what you've been reading. It's saying for a long time, anyone, sort of coaches, therapists, probably, anyone, mental health practitioners, have been attempting to resolve trauma using the cognitive mind. But recent studies have shown that the effects of trauma are stored within the body. So it's not just psychological. It's an issue that affects the whole system. And actually, I quite like this as an explanation. Trauma is not a disorder; it's an adaptation. So, I think that ties into me, sort of how someone is feeling, and you've adapted your responses due to past experiences. And it's the approach that I was reading about. So, trauma-informed practice is an approach to interventions which is grounded in the understanding that trauma exposure can impact an individual's neurological, biological, psychological, and social development. And it was saying the 6 principles are safety, trust, choice, collaboration, empowerment, and cultural consideration. I mean, I guess on the topic of our show, if understanding the trauma-informed approach and then embedding it, those 6 principles are pretty big, aren't they, if you're going to look at your approach in education.
Absolutely.
Which I maybe that's partly why people, there's a danger of it being surface level.
I think so. And I think it requires quite a lot of skill from the person to not react in a way which is because it can be so natural just to act in a very reactive sense, and perhaps
definitely. I think you can see that, can't you? Maybe especially within a mainstream environment or a classroom environment, that potentially your teacher and understandably and is just reacting to what's in front of them, and I think that probably goes back to what we were saying about if you are going to embed research, you have to have the time, the knowledge, the skills, and the support to do it.
So I guess that's another part actually of the research lead thing, is being able to sort of like collate what's out there, what the research says, in a way which you can then break down to other members of staff, and so everyone's on the same page and has a shared language.
I love that. I love that. That's one of, I think shared language is very powerful. I think because it's a shorthand, isn't it? And I think everyone would agree that education is somewhere time is of the essence. We don't have a lot of it, and if you're not going to what the last thing you want to do is scare the staff and say, well, we're going to do this and it's all going to take a lot of time, you're going to develop all these knowledge of all these studies and so on. So I mean, I find it very interesting then that your part of your role is distilling it. So you, because you love it, are going to do all the reading, the sort of meta-analysis and so on, and then almost distill it down that's then accessible to staff, and then, as you said, have this shared language that creates is time effective. And no, I'd love that as a process. That's really, really interesting. And I just think I hope that this is kind of anyone listening, you're thinking, okay, this is a way to bring in research into organisation or school or college and so on. So yeah, please feel free to if you're listening live, obviously you can message into the show. I've got Twitter open as well. Sorry, X. I've got X open as well, so I'm on there if you want to tweet. And if you are listening back afterwards, I'd still please do still get in touch, because I can speak for both of us. It's a huge area of passion for us, isn't it? With that, but really thinking about how to bring in that, the research, the way of distilling research into the staff team.
Bet UK is just 2 weeks away. Are you ready to join 30,000 attendees, 600 plus exhibitors on 7 content stages from 120 countries, and see Louis Theroux, Dame Darcy Bustle, Jason Arde, Laurel Kana, Baroness Floella Benjamin, Dan Fitzpatrick, Mr. PICT, and so much more? I might need to bring my trainers.
The best part? Educators go free.
Get your ticket now at uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This show.
So we've kind of made a start of this very big topic. So thinking about embedding research into practice and what that means, a little bit of the why, I think, and then we've talked about some, one of the big areas that is perhaps open to interpretation and would benefit from research embedded practice and being trauma informed. But I would just really love to use quite a lot of this show to just hear about some of the research you're currently focusing on.
Yeah. So I guess within each educational setting, the focus is going to be different on what the education provider actually needs to look at in terms of research. But the one where I'm currently at, we needed to look at PACE, by Dan Hughes.
Right, brilliant. Okay, I am really interested to hear about PACE.
Yeah. So that was I think it's a really interesting thing to look at that, because although PACE comes from like a bigger approach really called dyadic developmental psychotherapy. And
could you repeat that one again for me?
Dyadic developmental psychotherapy.
Okay, brilliant. Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, it sort of it came out of America, I think, by this clinical psychologist, Dan Hughes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's sort of built out of this sort of relational approach where sort of the relationship between the therapist, between the parent and the child is really important. And it's said to like be the, sort of like the locus of how therapy progress is made.
Right. Okay.
So
is brought to you in partnership
with
John Cat.
Press the wrong button. Sorry.
So yeah, I guess PACE is one of those things that they use in that, but then across the UK, actually, lots of schools have been thinking about perhaps including PACE, particularly, which stands for playful, acceptance, curiosity, and empathetic.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah, so lots of schools have been thinking about how that actually can be a really useful thing, one-to-one with children and young adults and learners. So yeah.
That's really interesting. So the approach is based on these 4 concepts of what was it? Playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy.
That's it.
And so the approach then is that you sort of use those in your interactions with whether it's a one-to-one or okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting. I mean, I guess I can see that. It was particularly things like playfulness and curiosity and things like that. That's a dream, isn't it? That's what you'd want from your class or your classroom and your lessons, to be bringing that out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's, and what was that? What was the one you said at the beginning as well? The
dyadic developmental psychotherapy.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So I don't. Yeah. That it's quite. I think it's its own sort of specific approach, really, to therapy, but I think I can imagine it wouldn't really work in a school setting, but it has some useful things and useful parts of it, which and PACE is one of those things which came out of it. So
really interesting. So you start with theory, the therapeutic theory, that you said, I think, was putting the relationship at the core. Is that yeah? Okay. So, I mean, it makes sense to me. So you start with that theory, and then one of the things, then various approaches have generated from it, and one of them is PACE. And interesting, you're saying quite a lot of the schools are implementing this PACE approach. I love that. Brilliant. Okay.
But I did some research on it, because it's really important just to check the evidence on this sort of thing.
Key. Yes. I mean, definitely. I was thinking, we quite often, don't we, are teaching children and young people fact check, what's your source?
Absolutely.
But potentially, do we always do that ourselves? Or do we read something and go, oh my God, without looking into the evidence?
And I find now, particularly like images online can be really deceiving. Like, it's so easy to be like misled by images.
Absolutely.
It's an unrelated topic, sorry.
No. I love I love a tangent on this show. I totally agree. And oh God, I mean, isn't sort of sharing these things on social media a very big part of it? Because you could basically take a snippet, couldn't you? Or like you said, an image, let alone if it's sort of AI involved or anything like that. And then I do think we are so used to receiving this information very, very quickly as well, literally at our fingertips, that you don't always stop to consider. Or
because you go on when you're tired as well, don't you? And it's
I tell you what, mine is a half story. So I'll read something, particularly if it's like in the evening, or I'll I'll be reading something, or I'll see a post or something like that, and then in the morning I'll go to tell someone, but I can only remember a little bit of it, and I'm like, oh no, actually that's so pointless. I'm trying to explain this. So what I've taken to doing now is, if I do read something that I know is going to be of interest to me, I'll bookmark it or email it to myself, and then I'll read it when I'm not half asleep. Because otherwise I've just got all these half read articles or theories or anything. But, so I've done it now. I've gone off on a tangent. So, where actually were we? We
were talking about PACE and the evidence of PACE, and that was a really interesting thing. And I looked online and I found a few sort of qualitative articles and case studies on PACE and its use in schools. I mean, the evidence for it at the moment is quite small. There's actually very little out there, but we also have to remember that it's quite a new approach as well. Research always takes a long time to produce, and then it has to go through peer review to make sure it's up to scientific standard. It will take a long time for us to truly know whether our approach stands up. I think there's promising signs, and I know dyadic developmental psychotherapy has got a good evidence base in itself. So but I guess in schools we need to have a little bit more evidence there. But in general, it's looking promising, but we need a bit more research on that.
I think that's it's interesting. There's a few things that you've said there, and I thought, I hadn't considered that. I mean, one is that the evidence tends to be qualitative. I mean, I think that's always a lot of things. It's going to be the case for a lot of things in education, isn't it? It's slightly subjective, the progress and things like that. Although I think also as a sector, it's very data driven. In those kind of finite, exams or attendance figures and that kind of thing. There is a lot of data. But when you're talking about embedding research into your practice, it's likely to be more qualitative, isn't it? Which probably throws up some problems.
I think particularly with this PACE approach, it's because like measuring improvement is kind of really hard because you're sort of trying to measure a relationship between and that is quite subjective. So,
So there's perhaps issues with how you present the evidence, I guess. And then also time. Like you said, time is, if this is relatively new, it's going to take a lot of time to gather those different sort of collections of data or feedback, isn't it? But I think, would you say then you can gain confidence in the approach because of the roots in the psychotherapy?
I think so. And I think it is relational, so it doesn't really need the same sort of scrutiny, I suppose, as like looking at a randomized control trial of something. So it's very different to looking at that sort of research, but it's definitely a valuable thing, I think. So
and could you explain the bit where you were saying things have to be peer reviewed? What's that then? Can you explain that?
So that's a really important part of the scientific process. And so, for example, let's say I do a study and on a particular educational technique, for example, and I find I've got some good findings and I try and publish it in a journal. It will need to go through this process where various experts in the field look at the methods and they look at how it's written, and they look at the sources that I'm using as well, and they really scrutinize that to make sure that I'm not
making it up.
They'll also check that my methods are sort of like reproducible, because it would be really bad if I basically just scratch down a few notes on my method and how I obtain my results. But it's got to be like a real clear recipe,
That's really interesting. So first of all, I'm getting sort of slight flashbacks back to secondary science lessons where you've got to have with a scientific experiment where it's got to be repeat. I can't remember. This is awful. Sorry to my previous science teachers, but I can't quite remember the acronym or something, but there was definitely something about you could to be able to repeat the experiment. So I'm getting really out of my depth now. I'm not a scientist. So this, I mean, that's a lot to go through, isn't it? To be published, to have your findings and your research. So there's a little element of kind of anything that's come out then will have been under intense scrutiny, whether we have the evidence yet or not.
I think and that's why it takes so long for it to go through this process, and why like evidence often really lags behind what we actually need as because I can imagine, like we're really desperate for new things, new ideas, new techniques, but actually like getting the evidence to show what's effective takes such a long time because it needs to go through this scrutiny.
That is so interesting. I'm just immediately thinking of all the things that have perhaps changed for children and young people over the last few years. Not just COVID necessarily, but things that we've kind of referred to already, so the impact of social media and I mean, obviously COVID and pandemic is a huge one, but there are a lot of changes with technology and things that mean that children and young people's lives are, I mean, so different from when I was younger. And like you said, perhaps we need these new approaches. But things are a few years. Would you say a few years behind?
Absolutely, because I mean, peer review is an important part of the process, and it takes a long time. But there's also other things like if you're trying to show an approach, you've got to have like a pilot study before you actually start your
Right.
main study. And it's got to
Yeah.
go through ethical review first. And so,
Yeah, very important. I guess you can't really miss that bit out.
So yeah, lots of
So,
different
I mean,
parts of research which take a long period of time. And so,
wow,
yeah,
that is really interesting. And I'm just going to ask now. So you have done your master's recently. That was in psychology.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're talking from experience then of doing your own research, and so you had to go through all those steps.
Yeah. So the study that I worked on had been through all those steps. But it was quite specific. It was experimental work and not field work. So I was in a laboratory really. So
oh wow! And what was the topic of your?
So we were looking at sleep and how we learn new words.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
So, oh gosh, I don't want to get out of my depth again, but sort of the process of how new words are learnt with different sleep.
Yeah.
Sort of.
So essentially, it's been sort of well studied for about 20 years now, perhaps a little bit longer, that when we learn new things, generally, not just words, they're in quite a fragile state for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And they can be easily lost to retroactive interference. So different things going on, new learning can sort of like wipe the slate again. But sleep seems to have a protective element to it. So when we learn things just before we go to sleep, that it's consolidated such that it becomes really quite stable knowledge.
That is fascinating. So, I mean, get a good night's sleep. Learn something, and then get a good night's sleep, and it's likely to be more. Quicker to retain, or
so it becomes more accessible. Our knowledge becomes more accessible after sleep as well.
That's really interesting, but also very interesting to think that the process that you explained, you had to do all of that before you then got into the research. So interesting.
So obviously each experiment and each piece of research has its own problems and its own ethical related issues. And so with that experiment, we had to think about because we needed people in the laboratory late at night. So we needed to think about, safety and around that. And
there's a lot to it, isn't there? But then I think how rewarding. I think now that you've done the experiments and the findings and so on, that you can now apply it when you're teaching. That's that must be pretty rewarding. That how great to have that explicit link between I've seen this, or I guess maybe before that. So I'm interested in this, and this is what other people have found, and now I want to find what happens when someone does this or this, and then to then be able to carry that through. And when you're teaching your pupils and your students, and bringing that in, that's amazing. Wow.
Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world.
Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the EtonX curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Right, so brilliant to hear about your research and to hear firsthand that link between research, as we said, research, evidence, and then bringing it into your own practice. So, what are you reading about, or what are you researching about now? Then as we implement.
So one of the things that we talked about the college was thinking a bit about executive functions and what we can do there, really, because executive functioning is so important for learning, but also just general behaviour around the college. And so it's really important. Central to pretty much most behaviour. So
and I'd even put out there central yet not often thought about, or not maybe understood. So could we go through that to start with a little bit? What do we mean by executive functioning?
Well, executive functioning, I suppose, they have been actually really well studied. We know quite a lot about like how they're important in working memory, for example, to sort of like regulate various sources of memory information sort of surfacing, to hold things in mind.
Great.
But we also know they're really important for sort of task switching and like being able to delegate attention to different sources at different moments in time. So
so I mean, even just a very quick think about that. If you have difficulties with those executives, that's going to impact a lot in a classroom, without a doubt. So if you have difficulty switching between tasks, so you've got to copy something down and then you've got to do a work or whatever, switching between tasks is going to be very difficult. And then what was that? Attending to different sources of information as well. So I guess that kind of auditory and then reading something. And so if you have difficulties with that, that's going to be really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to say, actually, there's another aspect of it, which is sort of like being able to sort of exert some top-down control on like impulsivity.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
For example, like say I'm really frustrated and what comes to mind is a swear word, and like I'm in a educational setting or somewhere where I really can't say that. Executive functions really pull down and say, no, stop. And I've got like this attentional resource basically to then monitor what I'm saying and really exert some control of myself.
Okay. So I mean, that's starting to perhaps maybe some of that's sounding familiar to educators. Okay, hold on. I have got students in my class and they get frustrated and they might blurt out a swear word or something, or walk out. And they also have difficulty kind of switching from task to task. And and paying attention to different things going on.
Because it's so hard to block out things as well, and that's a really big part if we've got someone noisy in the class, or it can be really difficult to focus in on.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's what we mean by executive functioning skills then, that kind of control, that kind of working memory, attending to different things, switching, transferring, and sort of organizational skills.
Totally. Being able to sort of like put planning into motion and that sort of thing is really an executive functioning skill as well. So,
and again, then all things that we require in the classroom. Or the education setting.
Definitely.
So what's the what kind of research is going on around this then?
Well, there's so much in general on like the actual processes. There's a lot on the neurobiology and things that happen in our prefrontal cortex, for example. But that one of the really hard and biggest challenges, I suppose, is how we can improve executive functions. And I think there's been attempts to do that, and it's been really, really difficult to actually see any progress.
Is that so? Actually coming up with the strategies that are going to help somebody improve their own executive functioning skills.
Yeah.
So that's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So is it then more if we were thinking about taking the research and embedding it and transforming your practice? Is it more about, I guess, strategies?
Yeah, and I think like particularly like sort of thinking about how you're giving instructions to students is really important, and that's something that continually came up when I was reading, and like being able to continually remind students of the task in hand and being able to be that sort of executive function for them, essentially.
That's really interesting. So we're kind of learning, or you've learned that it's difficult to improve the skills in someone. But what you could do as a teacher is be the executive functioning.
And but it's really interesting because the research shows that you can actually build good executive functionings on one task. So like I can you can get really good at like executive functions in maths, for example, but that won't necessarily transfer to anything else. So that's
so interesting.
That
is so interesting.
So it's like a task specificity about it. It's like
and is that I don't know if you've I don't know if you've got this far with the is that impacted by your interest in it?
I think it probably is. I mean, there's probably like a reward element and a practice element to it. So I would imagine so.
And I guess concentration and focus, I guess you're more likely to concentrate on something you're interested in, aren't you? But that is really interesting. So you can get very, very good at it. You could be in a maths lesson and you could be able to switch tasks and you could listen to different things. You could be organised. But that might not transfer to an English lesson.
I mean, it may, like an important part of most curriculums now is sort of like life skills, and like we might get really good at life skills in the lesson, but actually being able to take them outside of the college or educational institution.
So transferring, really transferring from environment to environment, not just subject to subject. Wow. That's going to have, I tell you what, that's going to have a very big impact, isn't it, on progression?
So it's a really important area that I think we need more research in. And so like some interesting things that happened sort of, I think 2012, 2015 era, there was some research done on like working memory and like how we could improve that. And a particular app was made. And it was really exciting for a lot of people to begin with. And then they found exactly that problem, like people were getting incredible executive functioning scores on this app and like being able to pass the executive functioning tests really well. And then it just wouldn't generalize anywhere else. So it's a real complex issue, I'd say.
It is, isn't it? I'm very difficult to think how to move past. So, cough again. Wow. Okay. How can we then? So you were saying, advice then to embed this within your classroom and your practice is to be the executive function.
Essentially, there's a lot of work on sort of like just instructions and thinking about breaking down instructions as well. And repeating them, and really thinking about the words that we use to say what we'd like from students or learners.
And I think it's I mean, my feeling is that these kind of strategies benefit everyone. So even if in your class people haven't necessarily got it noted that they have difficulties, these kind of embedding these ideas as as standard are going to benefit lots of people, aren't they, for many different reasons? I guess. So I guess that's something that I always think about research. It doesn't have to be linked to individuals. You can adopt these approaches as the norm.
Absolutely.
Bet UK is just 2 weeks away. Are you ready to join 30,000 attendees and 600 plus exhibitors on 7 content stages from 120 countries and see Louis Theroux, Dame Darcy Bustle, Jason Arde, Laurel Carner, Baroness Floella Benjamin, Dan Fitzpatrick, Mr. PICT and so much more? I might need to bring my trainers. The best part? Educators go free! Get your ticket now at uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Okay, so we were talking about executive functions and the huge impact that difficulties with those functions can have in the classroom. And we just sort of moved on a little bit, or talked a little bit about how I think it's important when you hear either reading research yourself or hearing about it from a research lead in your organisation, or you're doing CPD, is potentially not to get too caught up in which individuals in your classroom have these things, because a lot of these approaches are going to benefit a lot of people.
Absolutely. And like you see that even like, let's say like you're reading an article or a question. I mean, it's classic in questions where like it's just such a long question and you're like, I don't even know where to start breaking it down. And so like
absolutely.
And so like those things actually have a huge strain on everyone's executive functioning. So like it's not just specific students, as you say, or specific learners. It's really important for everyone to think about how we're displaying instructions. So I think so. So almost in a variety of ways as well would probably help a lot of people, wouldn't it? Not just auditory, displaying it as a visual cue as well. And so it's really important.
Good. And which is quite doable. It's quite achievable, isn't it? To do that.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
So but I suppose the real thing that's with the things which have looked at trying to help executive functions, the science behind it can be really messy, and so it does take it takes a really long time, and that's another part of what we were talking about earlier. With sort of how long it takes for research to actually show what's important or what the right thing to do is. For example, it's like, because you can like have findings and someone will find something amazing, and then like next year they'll find that it doesn't replicate, they can't do it again. So
linking that kind of how you've explained about the process of research, and that time it takes, and then like you said, then we're kind of an amazing study might not be able to be done again, and therefore loses its impact?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that definitely happens. Yeah. There's and like people think a lot about like the quality of the evidence, and that's really important. So I might be able to show that this one tool really improves executive functions, let's say, and then someone comes up with a more plausible tool, like, and so, or something like that, and that has priority at that point. So the evidence is always changing, and that's why someone really needs to look at it all the time and weigh up what's being said.
Definitely. I mean, just that example that you just gave about the people were using an app and doing really, really well, and then the evidence at that point is, oh wow, this improves people's executive functions. And then further research has found that actually it does, but in that situation. So, I mean, really good point that you've said is somebody, to be embedding research in your practice. Within your organization, somebody really needs to be keeping up with what's going on out there. I mean, it's just fascinating though, isn't it? So I think if you're that way inclined to keep up with all this research is
and there's
amazing.
So much which is important for education as well, because it is really like cross-disciplinary. Like there's there's important psychology stuff, but there's also loads of things about curriculum as well, isn't there? Like so
it's a huge area, isn't it? And I think, I mean, the way I think it deserves to be sort of as a forefront, as part of the role. I mean, not necessarily every educator's role, but like you said, if you have the research lead who can then be checking, keeping up to date with this, analysing it a bit, like you said, checking the sources and then the evidence for it, rather than the danger of just, I've read of this new new approach, so we're all going to try this new approach this term and that kind of thing, and then nothing ever actually getting embedded.
Absolutely.
And then finding that way that to distill it to staff in time effective strategies within the classroom. I mean, that's again, that'd be the dream, wouldn't it?
But I think it's really important as well to check the sources as well, because it can be you can actually find articles where they've found like 1 or 2 participants have actually been harmed, for example, or like have had some negative side effects. So like it's really important, particularly with ones which are actual interventions on people, for example. That the evidence is not flimsy in that sense at all. It needs to be watertight.
I mean, that's a really important point, isn't it? You're talking about people and psychology and interventions and things like that. It is very important to check that they're not harmful. Which I guess is going back again is why all that process is in place. The ethics and peer reviews and so on. Okay. So in our last few minutes, it's gone by so quick, and I knew it would. But in our last few minutes, are there sort of emerging areas or things coming up that you're kind of getting into?
So I was looking quite recently at sort of like physiology and like trying to like I was looking specifically actually at architecture of like learning classrooms and how that influences learning, and so
that is so interesting
and stuff like that. So and a lot of it is, if you've got small groups of classes, you can actually really take that on board and really think about how you've organized your classroom and stuff like that to really aid learning.
That's really interesting, and I guess probably links to a lot of other areas. So it's going to link to that kind of helping people with executive functioning. It's going to help with neurodiversity. And it's going to help with trauma-informed approach as well, isn't it? I mean, I know, we talked briefly right back at the beginning of the show. We were talking about safety and how somebody's reacting. So the architecture of the classroom, again, is something that could support a lot of need different needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, neurodiversity, like sort of things which allow people to sort of like integrate sensory wise is really important. And so that's
I mean, it's kind of what's coming out is it can all be interlinked.
Yeah.
So with time and sort of somebody responsible for doing these kind of things and keeping up with the research and covering lots of different aspects, actually you can, by the time it gets down to a strategy in the classroom, it's meeting a lot of individual needs in one swoop. Beautiful. Brilliant. Okay, so we've got architecture of the classroom that we're going to listen out for in the future. And is there anything else that's coming up that's interesting?
I mean, it's sort of building upon that, just more generally, like thinking about like learners' needs, sort of like whether they need food, whether they come in hungry, for example, and like whether they need a drink and stuff like that has quite a huge impact on like how they actually are able to engage with the task. And you know, it's actually important for executive functioning that we're like not hungry. So and we're not trying to block out the fact that we're freezing cold, or so all these things actually have influences on those.
I think going back to what we were saying at the beginning, you know, we've all got our whys and our values and our culture. And, you know, I think, you know, we've in common, you know, the culture is sort of care and nurture. But it is really interesting to make that explicit link to the research as well. That is saying, if you are trying to manage the messages from your brain that you're hungry, and you're trying to ignore that, you are not able to attend to the task in hand in the classroom. I mean, and that is powerful, isn't it? Research is powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it gives a reason, gives an evidence for your reasoning of how you're operating as an educator. Yeah. I love it. Absolutely love it. I mean, today has been, as I said at the beginning, I've really, really looked forward to it. It's right up my street. And I've just absolutely loved hearing about your role and the processes that you go through as a research lead. And I think, you know, the staff that are learning, you know, are at that sort of final bit of the research cycle or whatever, of embedding it. The staff must benefit so much from hearing, you know, all that evidence. So I just think that's fantastic. It's really informed education, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you've got the education that's informed by psychology, neurobiology, sociology, even. You know,
absolutely. That's really true.
So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, brilliant. And as I said before, would love to hear your thoughts. Probably would love to actually follow up with another show hearing about more research. So Josh, if you're willing. But yeah, if you've got any thoughts on it, if you've got any questions, over on X or through the Teachers Talk Radio X account. Gosh, my mind went blank. So I was too busy thinking about architecture of classrooms now. But yeah, Josh, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everyone for listening.